speech as always. It's a good positioning for the upcoming panel, which is obviously going to focus on all of these topics which Emmanuel so eloquently portrayed. So I would like to call up here on stage first of all the moderator of the upcoming Football Integrity Forum. That's Paul Reidy. So Paul, thank you for joining us. Also joining him as speakers, we have Fernando Veiga Gomes, who's the chair of SIGA Europe and a partner, of course, at Abreu Advogados. Joaquim Evangelista, who's the president of the Sindicato dos Jogadores. Olá, Fernando. Olá, Joaquim. Joining us as well, we have, I believe, Roberto Fiore from Video Call, who's joining us. Is that correct? He's here. Okay, sorry, I just met you. I had an indication that you were joining remotely, but great to have you here. So, gentlemen, really look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Boa tarde a todos. É autêntico prazer estar aqui na Porto.
It's a great pleasure to be here in Porto. I must confess that I don't speak very little Portuguese, so this session is going to be done in English.
I am the English correspondent from Diario, based in Madrid, guys. And we have 30 minutes to get through a subject matter that could literally take us hours and hours and hours. We're trying to break down, get the virtual crystal ball out, and see what lies in store for the future of football. We have three guests who straddle different genres or different areas of the business. And I think the first port of call is to revisit the events of April the 18th, 2021, when 12 of Europe's most decorated and most celebrated teams decided that they were going to announce a breakaway Super League. And that's where we want to start today. The first thing I want to do is we here in this room, we here at this conference, we're all football people at the end of the day. We're fortunate to work in the business. We're privileged to work in the industry of the sport we love. So I firstly want to ask the panel, how did you feel on that Sunday night when the news broke? Roberto, first to you. How did you react when the news broke about the Super League?
Well, as you said before, good morning, first of all, good afternoon. And as you were saying before, we are here, but as a professional working in my side in law. But first of all, we are fans, supporter of football. So when you hear about this kind of news, you react not only under a professional aspect, thinking about the possible implications, but also because of your feelings. So going back to your answer, it was pretty strange, just rumbling something and really cannot understand what will be the future, what will be the next step. So it was like not to reorient your thoughts. It was well the first feeling.
Okay, I just want to pass that on to Joaquim. What was your reaction, Joaquim, that Sunday night when you heard about the news for the first time?
Thank you, hello everybody. Normal reaction, expected.
Okay.
And I think in the future will be a reality, in my opinion. It is impossible to stop this kind of initiative. In the personal point of view, I'm against, the players are against. This proposal kill the European model of sport. It's clear for us. It's danger because they don't attend the values of sports, the small clubs, the balance between sports, solidarity mechanism. They don't attend the health of the player, well-being of the player. They don't concern about that. They look at the money point. And in the end of the day, it was a unilateral initiative. They don't listen to the players, they don't listen to the coaches, they don't listen to the fans. So it's dangerous for the football, as we see the football, but I think in the future will be a reality. So the important thing is that the stakeholders can be on the table and have a genuine dialogue. The problem is not only the Super League, is all the calendar. We need to, because today I see everybody take a position in favor of FIFA, in favor of UEFA, depends of the interest. I think we need to look at the problem without choose apart. Because in the end of the day, what we need is how we can have a calendar that we can have the revenues, but at the same time protecting the health of the players and the well-being, in my opinion.
And Fernando, lastly to you, you're obviously very involved in the industry, in the world of clubs and the legalities of things like that. What was your reaction on that Sunday evening?
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. It was not surprising.
Okay.
It was not surprising. I think we all want to defend the European model of football and the principle of sports merit and all that. But in the end, we don't want to regulate the European football. And so you can't do one thing without the other. And what happened is that the attempts to regulate it, they all kind of failed, like the financial fair play and then sustainability model of UEFA. They failed and failed again. And what happened is that the world is changing. I mean, we're from a different generation, and maybe a young 16-year-old kid, my own son is a Real Madrid supporter. He doesn't want to see Real Madrid Getafe. I respect Getafe a lot, but he doesn't want to see that match. He wants to see Real Madrid against Bayern Munich as many times as possible. And so this is the reality. And so it's the problem is that big clubs, they became global brands, and the budgets that they have, I mean, they don't want to compete with small clubs in their own leagues. That's the problem. There's a huge and widening gap between the budgets of the big clubs and the smaller clubs in their own league. So they don't want to compete internally anymore. And so this is a big problem. And because of the lack of regulation, and because also, and I'm talking from my experience, a lot of United States investment into European football. So we have the risk of losing the European model of football that we talked about, and the new shareholders of these big MCO groups will dictate the rules. And if they, in the future, they might decide to, if it's not the Super League, it will be a different competition. Maybe we will have mergers of different leagues to make them bigger and stronger. We don't know, but it's still, it's very exciting days in the end. But it's changing rapidly.
It does feel that the initial response from the governing bodies has been to go for expansion. Expanded World Cup, we've got the expanded Champions League, we're going to see for the first time this introduction of a 32 FIFA Club World Cup, which will be staged in the US next year. We still have a lot of doubts about the actual execution of that. I mean, for you, Joaquim, from the position you represent your players, is this the answer? Is there too much football? Do fans want more football? Do players want more football? Players are playing 70 plus games a year potentially.
Yeah.
I mean,
Impossible. Regarding the first question, I think we need people, players, coaches, directors, presidents of the leagues, federation, to stand up. It's important. Not allowed that they do this in silence, behind, in the shadows, you understand? Mm-hmm. And we have players do that. This weekend, we have an interview with Bernardo Silva for our magazine. The next one is about the workload. Okay, we have Portuguese players, plays abroad, like Bernardo, Bruno, Ruben, are at the top level. And they speak, and people listen them. The media listen them. Klopp, Guardiola, Holland. It's important that they continue to do that. And it's a genuine declaration. You understand? Mm-hmm. Bernardo said he has a daughter with 1 year old. I don't have time to see my daughter. What's happening? He don't have a lot of injuries because of this body composition, he said. But it's difficult to be on the top level, this performance, playing with these matches, and don't have time to rest, to be with the family. And when they say that in the media, have impact in the fans, have impact in the bodies. You remember at the time when we talk about Super League, Xavier Tebas was
Yes, very outspoken.
a big role. I remember in the European leagues, he stand up, but all the other presidents, they don't say nothing. And he left. He left. Now he's Portuguese president. Pedro Proença is the president of the European leagues. At the same time, you remember the English clubs, the pressure of the fans was also important to stop the issue Super League. But we need to bring the issue to the media and the responsibles of sport, the governing bodies. They need to attack this issue and take a position. And I don't see a lot of people do that with the responsibility. You understand?
Yeah.
I see different stakeholders defending different positions, but in the end of the day, more competitions. You understand?
Yeah, completely.
So I think it's important. We need your support, the media support. We need to bring the players, bring the coaches, and find a model who brings balance to sports, to football. I think this, in the end of the day, if Zephyrin and Gianni sit at the same table, they find a solution, easy. The question is that at this moment, there is no dialogue.
Yeah.
Also with the players, FIFPro is not listen. They do that unilaterally. So it's very difficult to change that. But if you ask me what will be the solution in the future, I think in the end of the day they will kill the model, and the money dictate the rules.
Yeah. Completely, no. I'd love to talk about the Super League for a long time, and I think we could be here exploring all sorts of avenues, but I'm conscious that time is against us and we want to cover other areas which the future lies ahead. Two areas that are of concern, or certainly of interesting debate, are the multi-club ownership model, and at the same time, as groups are acquiring more clubs, we're seeing clubs go out of business. I think the most galling episode we saw recently was FC Girondins de Bordeaux, one of the most decorated clubs in French football, with more than 100 years of history, going bankrupt. How can the business and how can the governing bodies and how can the institutions do two things? Secure the future and the heritage of these clubs that represent, in the case of Bordeaux, a city of more than 250,000 people. Should we treat football clubs not like traditional businesses? Because I don't believe they are. They need to be treated more like heritage buildings or iconic buildings that represent a city. This is for you, Fernando. I'd just like to get your thoughts on what we can do.
Well, it's MCO is a reality that we cannot ignore, and it will stay. Let me just I have it right. I was expecting the question, so I wrote it down. In 2012, you have in Europe 40 clubs belonging to MCO groups. In 2018, the number increased to 100, and in 2022, we have more than 180, and still growing. Mm-hmm. And so this is a reality that we cannot ignore. And we're talking about big investments, and so the nature of the club is changing. Also the shareholders, the way they approach, especially, and I mentioned this already, if they are from the United States, the phenomenon of multi-club ownership they're familiar with for more than 20 years in the United States in many different of their big sports. And so it's the way they approach ownership, the way they see it, the way they make their investments is towards a sustainable competition. They're there to make money. They're not there to lose money. And if you look at many of the European leagues, they're not sustainable. They're not, and on one hand, they're not sustainable. On the other hand, there's this huge gap between the 3 or 4 or 5 big clubs in a certain league and the others, and this cannot carry on for long. So the answer, I don't know if Joaquim agrees with this, the answer would be always proper regulation to avoid this kind of, for instance, we cannot have some financial fair play rules applicable to the 4 or 5 or 6 clubs in a certain league, and then you have internal regulation which are more flexible for the others, and this doesn't make sense. You need some common standards.
So you'd welcome the model that the English government were proposing of an independent regulator to come in who are neutral, who have no vested interest in either the clubs or the governing bodies, and their only functions are to ensure the viability of these football clubs, that we don't see the likes of Bordeaux or Siena, Fiorentina, Mouscron. I mean, you could be here all day rhyming off a list of clubs that have gone to the wall.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And from you, Roberto, I know the area of compliance is very important in your activity. Basically, these clubs are floundering because they're not being compliant.
I think so. I think this is one big issue. I'm trying also to link in the dots of what Joaquim and Fernando said, that we're talking about regulations, we're talking about new issues, we're talking about the balancing of different needs. I think that first of all the organization, all the stakeholders in football has to regain credibility. And one way to regain credibility and so ask and pretend something is really to be compliant, you know. We're asking for new regulations, but the main activity to do is to be compliant with that new rule. You talked about Firenze, Fiorentina, and Siena, and other Italian clubs that got bankruptcy, you know. And in Italy, also learning from our past in other industries and other political affairs with widespread of corruption, we have learned a lot. And also in football industry, now we're ruled by 3 main pillars: the prevention for corporate crime liability, the model for to prevent illicit sport behaviors, and the last one in these months for safeguarding. You know, these are 3 pillars. And I really believe that this helps on one side to regain credibility, on the other side to prevent the crisis, many different crises. So I suggest to shift the approach to compliance. Now we're thinking of compliance as a thick, an activity that you have to do. It's just like a tool. It should become a pillar on which you can build the organization. That can lead you following international standard, universal standard can be shared by the stakeholders, and it can help to minimize the risk, not to avoid, but to minimize and manage the risk of this situation that really, since just to close the circle, since we're talking also as under an emotional aspects, do not touch only the companies, don't touch only the balance sheet, do not touch only the taxes, but touch also the emotion of millions of people.
I'm going to move on to the next thing because, again, I'm conscious of the time. We've talked about US ownership, and there is a tendency for more and more clubs to be acquired by American investors, American sports magnates, whatever, with 45%, I think, of the Premier League clubs currently under US ownership. And I think we have a tendency in Europe to view the US sports model with a degree of suspicion. I think we as Europeans, we're very traditional, we like our traditions in sport. But there's a lot of positive things we can learn from US sport too. I mean, I think every team in the NFL goes in believing they can win the Super Bowl. And certainly that's not true when you apply it to some of the bigger leagues in Europe. the idea, the goal is to survive, not get relegated. Do you see a future where we avoid promotion and relegation, whereby US investors want to protect their investment and not run the risk of jeopardy? Is that something that's going to happen in our lifetime? Fernando?
Maybe, yes. I mean, in the end, the national leagues, they're independent organization. They're made by the clubs, and the clubs are owned by shareholders, foreign shareholders or not. So in the end, they will dictate their own organization rules. So if we don't protect the European model of sport with sporting merit, promotions and relegations and all that, we might end in a situation where they just break away and they organize their own closed leagues, and they will leave the national competitions as a minor competition. Of course, there's a risk.
So the Super League announcement, was that a veiled threat? You do something about this, or we will do something ourselves. It was like kind of forcing the hand of UEFA and by and large FIFA to react, listen to our interests, respond, or we will take action into our own hands.
Absolutely.
Okay. And do you think there's also feasible a time that in our lifetime we're going to see this overseas model? There's talk of Pedro's giving me some the eyes. I'm going to try and wrap up. There's so many things we could talk about today. I mean, it's such a huge subject matter. So I think we're going to have to wind things up here, and it's a shame because, like I said, we could be here for hours and hours discussing these matters, because they're really important matters, and I think they're matters that mean a lot to all of us as football fans and people who work in the industry. So I'll bring it to a close. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Fernando. And thank you, Joaquim.
It was very good.
Thank you very much.
Muito bem. Vamos lá.